You are going to die in prison. I will spend every penny I have to make sure you never see the sun again.
He spent $12 million on specialists to fix his daughter's silent brain, never realizing the problem wasn't a defect. It was a diamond earring lodged in her throat since birth. When the maid finally risked her life to pull it out, the billionaire didn't thank her. He tackled her to the ground, screaming about murder, until he heard the one sound he thought was impossible. Welcome back to another heart-stopping episode of Black Lives Story. Today, we are entering the silent, gilded cage of the Vane Estate, where a father's grief has blinded him to the truth. We meet Ayana, a trauma nurse forced to work as a maid, who is the only one brave enough to see that the broken child isn't mute, she's suffocating. If you believe that true heroes often wear the humblest uniforms, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of second chances. Now, let's unlock the silent wing and see what happens when the truth finally screams.
The west wing of the Vane Estate was not built for living. It was built for containment. The walls were padded with acoustic silk. The windows were triple-paned to block out the sound of the birds and the wind. The air conditioning was a whisper-quiet system imported from Germany, designed to circulate oxygen without creating a draft. It was the most expensive silence money could buy. Ayana Cole was on her knees in the center of the hallway, pushing a horsehair brush against the white marble. Scrub, dip, scrub. She moved with a rhythm that had been drilled into her over the last 6 months. She was 32, but in this uniform, a stiff gray dress with a white apron, she felt ageless and faceless. "Remember Ayana," Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, had hissed that morning. "The West Wing is a sterile environment. You are not there to be a friend. You are there to remove dust. If Mr. Vane enters, you become part of the wall. Do not speak. Do not look him in the eye. Do not breathe too loudly." Ayana dipped the brush into the bucket. The water smelled of industrial lemon and bleach, the scent of erasing one's existence. She wasn't just a cleaner, or at least she hadn't always been. Her hands, now red and chapped from the water, had once placed 4 lines into the veins of premature babies in a triage tent in Damascus. They had once held the clamps during emergency surgeries in Sudan. But here, in Connecticut, her nursing degree was just paper in a drawer. Here, she was unskilled labor. Ayana scooted the bucket forward. She reached the open door of the nursery. She paused. Inside, the room looked less like a bedroom for a 7-year-old girl and more like a laboratory for sensory experiments. Celeste Vane sat in the center of a plush rug. She was tiny for 7. Her hair was brushed into perfect, glossy curls that framed a face of porcelain stillness. She was wearing a dress that cost more than Ayana's car, velvet and lace, stiff and uncomfortable. Surrounding her were the toys. There were fiber-optic light strands that pulsed in calming rhythms. There were textured spheres designed to stimulate tactile response. There were tablets playing Mozart at a low decibel. Celeste wasn't playing with any of them. She was staring at a dust mote floating in a shaft of sunlight. Her hands were folded in her lap, motionless. Her mouth was a tight line. Ayana felt a phantom ache in her chest. It was the nurse in her, the part she tried to suppress. She looked at the child's posture. It wasn't the relaxed posture of a daydreamer. It was the rigid, guarded posture of someone in chronic defense mode. She looks like the shell-shocked soldiers, Ayana thought, then shook the thought away. Just clean the floor. Click-clack. Click-clack. The sound of hard-soled dress shoes on marble echoed down the hallway. Ayana froze. She scrambled to the side of the doorframe, pulling her bucket with her, tucking her body into the alcove. She lowered her head, fixing her eyes on the floor tiles. Become the wall. Silas Vane swept past her. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. He didn't look at Ayana. He didn't even break stride. To him, she was just an automated cleaning unit. He wasn't alone. Trailing him were 3 men in white lab coats, carrying tablets and sleek silver cases. "The latest MRI confirms the stagnation," Silas was saying, his voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "The Broca's area shows 0 synaptic firing during stimulus. It's dead tissue, gentlemen. We are wasting time with therapy." They marched into the nursery. Ayana watched from the hallway, her heart pounding. Silas stopped in front of his daughter. He didn't kneel. He didn't say, "Hello, princess." He didn't touch her hair. He stood over her like a skyscraper. "Celeste," Silas said. It wasn't a greeting, it was a test. Celeste didn't look up. She kept staring at the dust mote. Only her fingers moved, a tiny, repetitive twitch of her thumb against her palm. Silas turned to the lead doctor, a man with a heavy Swiss accent. "You see?" Silas gestured to the child as if she were a broken toaster. No response. "Auditory processing is intact. We proved that last year. She hears me. She just refuses to engage. It's a hardware issue." "Mr. Vane," the Swiss doctor said, tapping his tablet. "As we discussed, the structural defect in the speech center is profound. The mute condition appears absolute. We recommend the experimental implant. It bypasses the vocal cords entirely and stimulates the larynx directly." "Do it," Silas said immediately. "It is invasive," the doctor warned. "There are risks of infection, nerve damage." "I don't care about the risks," Silas snapped. He walked over to the window, turning his back on his daughter. "I care about the result. I want her to speak. I have spent 7 years and $12 million listening to silence. I am done waiting." Ayana gripped her scrub brush. Her knuckles turned white. She looked at Celeste. The little girl hadn't moved, but a single physiological reaction betrayed her. A tear. It leaked from the corner of Celeste's left eye. It rolled down her cheek, slow and heavy. Her face remained blank, but her hand, the one twitching in her lap, suddenly flew up to her throat. She dug her small fingernails into the skin of her neck, right below the jawline. She clawed at it, a silent, desperate scratching motion. Silas turned back around. He saw her hand on her throat. "Stop that," Silas ordered, annoyed. "Dr. Eris, she's doing it again." The tactile fixation on the neck. "It is a self-soothing tic," the doctor dismissed, making a note. "Common in nonverbal subjects. She is frustrated by her inability to communicate." "It's ugly," Silas muttered. He walked over and gently but firmly pulled Celeste's hand away from her neck. "Enough, Celeste," he said coldly. "We are going to fix you. Just stop fidgeting." He dropped her hand. It fell limp to her lap. Ayana watched the scene, a cold chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She had seen self-soothing tics before. Children rocking back and forth. Children humming. This wasn't that. Celeste wasn't rubbing her neck to soothe herself. She was clawing at it, and the look in her eyes wasn't frustration. Ayana knew that look. She had seen it in soldiers with shrapnel in their chests. She had seen it in children trapped under rubble. It was the look of someone who was suffocating. She isn't broken, Ayana thought, a dangerous realization taking root in her mind. She is in pain. "Schedule the surgery for Thursday," Silas commanded, walking out of the room. The entourage followed him, leaving the little girl alone in the center of the room, the tear drying on her cheek, surrounded by expensive machines that could measure her brain waves but couldn't feel her pain. Ayana looked at the bucket of dirty water. She looked at the child. She knew she should keep scrubbing. She knew she should stay invisible. But the nurse in her was waking up. And the nurse knew that silence wasn't always a symptom. Sometimes it was a scream. The next morning, the silent wing was bathed in cold, gray light from a passing storm. Ayana was in the nursery, polishing the brass rails of Celeste's antique crib, a piece of furniture the girl hadn't slept in for years, but which Silas insisted on keeping as a museum piece. Celeste was sitting on the floor nearby. She was trying to build a tower with heavy wooden blocks. Each block was a solid cube of oak, etched with letters she would never say. Ayana watched her from the corner of her eye. The child's movements were sluggish. Every time Celeste swallowed, her head dipped slightly, a subtle flinch that most people would miss. But Ayana saw it. Dysphagia, the nurse in her brain whispered. Difficulty swallowing. Celeste reached for the top block, a large, heavy cube with the letter Z. Her small fingers fumbled. The block slipped. Thud. The heavy wood landed corner first directly onto Celeste's bare toes. It was a crushing blow. Ayana flinched just hearing the impact. Celeste's eyes flew open wide. The shock of the pain hit her instantly. Her body stiffened, her back arching in a reflex of pure agony. Ayana dropped her polishing cloth and spun around, expecting the shriek. Any child would shriek. It was biological. Pain equals noise. Celeste opened her mouth. Her jaw unhinged wide, a cavern of distress. Her chest heaved, sucking in air for the scream. But the scream didn't come. Instead, a terrifying, wet gasp rattled in her chest. Hua! It sounded like a vacuum seal breaking. Celeste didn't just stay silent. She grabbed her throat. Both hands flew up to her neck, digging into the soft skin above her collarbone. Her face, pale a moment ago, flushed a dark, angry red, then deepened rapidly into a bruise-colored purple. Ayana froze. She watched the child's neck muscles strain. The veins in Celeste's forehead bulged. Her eyes were terrified, pleading, fixed on the ceiling. This wasn't silent brain syndrome. This wasn't a neurological disconnect. Ayana had seen neurological silence. It was passive. It was empty. This was active. This was a war. Celeste was trying to scream. Her vocal cords were engaging. Her lungs were pushing air. But something was stopping the sound from escaping. Tracheal tug, Ayana noted, her eyes locking onto the hollow of the child's throat, which was sucking inward with every desperate breath. Intercostal retraction. The skin between her ribs was pulling tight. Cyanosis. Her lips were turning blue. The realization hit Ayana with the force of a physical blow. It shattered the illusion of the wealthy estate and the expensive doctors. She isn't mute, Ayana thought, horror cold in her veins. She is choked. The child wasn't refusing to speak. She was physically incapable of passing enough air through her larynx to create phonation. There was an obstruction, a blockage so old, so integrated, that her body had grown around it, leaving only a tiny aperture for breath. Just enough to survive, but not enough to scream. Celeste was drowning in plain sight. The silent scream ended. Celeste collapsed forward, gasping, her forehead resting on the carpet, her small body shuddering with the effort of simply breathing. Ayana stood over her. The polishing cloth lay forgotten on the floor. The experts had missed it. The MRI scans, focused on the brain, had missed the throat. They were looking for ghosts in the machine when the problem was a rock in the pipe. Ayana looked at the door. Mrs. Higgins would be doing her rounds in 5 minutes. She looked at the child. Ayana made a choice. She crossed the invisible line. She knelt down. "Celeste," Ayana whispered. The girl flinched, curling into a ball. "I know," Ayana said, her voice trembling but fierce. "I know it hurts. I saw you." Celeste looked up. Her eyes were wet, filled with a profound, ancient exhaustion. For 7 years, no one had acknowledged the physical reality of her pain. They had called it a behavior. They had called it a tic. Ayana reached out. She didn't touch the girl's shoulder. She touched her throat. She placed 2 fingers gently over the larynx. She felt it. It wasn't soft cartilage. It was hard, irregular, a lump of calcified mass sitting deep behind the thyroid cartilage, vibrating faintly with every ragged breath. It was real. "I found it," Ayana whispered. Ayana found Mrs. Higgins in the linen closet, counting sheets with the precision of a bank teller. "Mrs. Higgins," Ayana said, breathless. She hadn't taken off her apron. "We need to call an ambulance. Right now." Mrs. Higgins didn't look up from her clipboard. "Lower your voice, Ayana. We do not run in the hallways." "It's Celeste," Ayana pressed, stepping into the small room, invading the housekeeper's sanctuary. "She isn't mute. She has a blockage, a calcified mass in her larynx. I felt it. When she tries to swallow, it cuts off her airway. She's in agony." Mrs. Higgins finally stopped counting. She turned slowly. Her face was a mask of pinched disapproval. "You felt it," Mrs. Higgins repeated, her tone dripping with ice. "You touched the child?" She dropped a block. She was choking. "I checked her airway." "You are a cleaner, Ayana," Mrs. Higgins cut her off, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are paid to scrub toilets and polish brass. You are not paid to diagnose the daughter of Silas Vane." "I was a nurse for 10 years. Ayana argued, her desperation rising. "I know the difference between a neurological disorder and a physical obstruction. The doctors are wrong. They are looking at her brain, but the problem is in her throat." Mrs. Higgins laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "The doctors," she scoffed. "Dr. Aris is the leading neurologist in the country. Mr. Vane pays him $50,000 a month to treat Celeste. And you think, what? That you, with your mop bucket and your community college English, know better than a man who lectures at Harvard?" "Yes," Ayana said firmly. "Because he looks at charts." I looked at her. Mrs. Higgins's face hardened. She pointed a finger at the door. "This conversation is over. If I hear you mention this again, to me, to the staff, or God forbid, to Mr. Vane, you will be fired on the spot. And I will make sure the agency blacklists you. You won't scrub floors in a gas station in this state, let alone a mansion. She leaned in. Do you understand? You have a mother in a wheelchair, don't you? Think about her next rent check. The threat hit its mark. Ayana froze. She thought of her mother's medication. She thought of the heating bill. The reality of poverty was a leash, and Mrs. Higgins had just yanked it tight. Ayana lowered her eyes. She felt the shame burn in her throat. The shame of knowing the truth, but not being able to afford to speak it. I understand, Ayana whispered. Good. Mrs. Higgins turned back to the sheets. Finish the east wing. And stay away from the nursery. 8 p.m. The mansion was transforming. The daytime silence was replaced by the bustle of the evening routine. Silas Vane stood in the foyer. He looked like a prince from a dark fairy tale. He wore a tuxedo that fit perfectly, his cufflinks glinting under the chandelier. He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his bow tie by a millimeter. He looked perfect. He looked like a man who had everything under control. Ayana stood in the shadows of the servants' corridor, watching him. She held her breath. Go check on her, she willed him. Just go upstairs. Look at her throat. Just once. Silas checked his watch. He glanced up the grand staircase toward the silent wing. For a second, his expression faltered, a flicker of grief crossing his face. But he didn't go up. He couldn't bear to see the failure. He turned to the butler. I will be back by midnight. Is the night nurse settled? Yes, sir. Nurse Brenda is in the monitor room. Fine, Silas said. He opened the heavy front door and walked out into the night, escaping the silence of his home for the noise of a charity gala where people would applaud him for his generosity. Ayana watched the taillights of his limousine fade down the driveway. She looked toward the monitor room. Nurse Brenda was at agency hire, a woman who spent her shifts scrolling through TikTok with headphones on. She viewed the silent wing as an easy gig because the patient never complained. Ayana walked to the staff locker room to get her coat. Her shift was over. She should go home. She should protect her job. But as she reached for her bag, a roll of thunder shook the house. The storm that had been threatening all day was breaking. Rain lashed against the windows. Ayana stopped. She thought about the tracheal tug. She thought about the blockage vibrating in Celeste's throat. If the power went out, if the air filtration system stopped, the change in pressure could trigger a spasm. Ayana looked at the exit. Then she looked at the service stairs leading up to the nursery. She put her bag down. I can't leave, she whispered to the empty room. She took off her coat. She walked to the stairs. She wasn't going home. She was going to wait in the shadows. The storm hit the Vane Estate like a hammer. Wind slammed against the triple-paned glass of the west wing, vibrating the floorboards. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a sound so loud it felt geological, shaking the dust from the chandeliers. Ayana sat on the top step of the service staircase, listening. She heard the wind. She heard the rain. Then she heard the zap. A transformer blew somewhere on the estate grounds. The lights in the hallway flickered once, a dying spasm of electricity, and then vanished. The hum of the air filtration system died. The silence that rushed back and was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. Pitch black. Emergency generators should kick in, Ayana whispered, counting seconds. 1, 2, 3. They didn't. The storm must have severed the main line to the auxiliary unit. Ayana stood up. She pulled her phone from her pocket and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stale air. She ran to the monitor room first. She pushed the door open. The bank of screens that usually displayed the vital signs and video feeds of the nursery was dead. Black mirrors reflecting her own flashlight. In the corner, slumped in a recliner, was Nurse Brenda. She hadn't even woken up when the power died. The blue glow of a smartphone illuminated her face from under a blanket. She was wearing massive, over-ear noise-canceling headphones. Ayana shone the light on her face. Brenda didn't flinch. She was deep in a video, completely disconnected from the reality of the house. Useless, Ayana thought, a surge of anger tightening her chest. She wouldn't hear a bomb go off. Ayana didn't waste time waking her. She turned and ran down the hallway toward the nursery. The door to Celeste's room was ajar. Ayana burst in. Celeste? She swept the flashlight beam across the room. It caught the expensive sensory toys, now lifeless lumps of plastic. It caught the velvet curtains. Then it caught the bed. Celeste wasn't sleeping. She was sitting bolt upright in the center of the mattress, clutching the sheets with white-knuckled hands. She was thrashing. Ayana rushed to the bedside. I'm here. It's just a storm, honey. It's just. She stopped. In the harsh white light of the LED beam, Celeste's face was a mask of horror. Her eyes were bulging, fixed on a point in the middle distance that didn't exist. Her mouth was open in a silent O, and she was turning blue. It wasn't the subtle cyanosis of earlier. This was deep, dark, hypoxic blue. Her lips looked like bruises. Celeste threw her head back, her back arching off the mattress. Her hands flew to her throat, clawing at the skin, leaving angry red welts. GDDHHH. The sound was wet, thick, and impossible. It was the sound of air hitting a wall. Ayana dropped the flashlight on the mattress, so it illuminated the child. She grabbed Celeste's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was thready, rapid, fluttering like a trapped bird. The pressure change, Ayana realized terror flooding her veins. The storm dropped the barometric pressure. The tissue in her throat swelled. The calcified mass, it shifted. It wasn't just blocking her voice anymore. It had rotated. It was blocking her trachea. Celeste, look at me. Ayana shouted, abandoning the rule of silence. She grabbed the girl's face between her hands. Can you breathe? Can you cough? Celeste shook her head frantically. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. She was suffocating in a room designed to keep the world out. Ayana looked at the door. If she ran for help, it would take 5 minutes to find the butler, another 10 for the ambulance to navigate the storm-flooded roads. Celeste didn't have 15 minutes. She had 3, maybe 2. The child's eyes rolled back in her head. Her thrashing slowed. She was losing consciousness. The oxygen deprivation was shutting down her brain. Ayana looked at the expensive, useless toys. She looked at the darkness pressing in. There was no one coming. No doctor. No father. No savior. There was only a cleaner with a secret past and a flashlight. Ayana grabbed Celeste's shoulders. She laid the child back against the pillows. She tilted Celeste's head back, opening the airway as much as possible. I'm going to help you, Ayana said, her voice dropping into the command tone she hadn't used in years. But you have to trust me. She reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out the small emergency kit she kept there, a habit from the war zone she couldn't break. Inside, nestled next to a bandage, was a pair of long, stainless steel hemostats she used for extracting splinters from the floorboards. She snapped the flashlight into her mouth, holding it with her teeth. She directed the beam down the child's throat. Open, Ayana commanded. Celeste was limp now, fading fast. Her jaw went slack. Ayana pried the mouth open. She looked into the dark tunnel of the throat. She saw it. Deep down, past the tonsils, wedged tight against the vocal cords, was a glint of something that wasn't bone. It wasn't a tumor. It shone in the flashlight beam. Flash. The memory hit her. Not the nursery. Not Connecticut. The sand. The heat. The blood. The beam of the flashlight narrowed, illuminating the back of Celeste's throat. For Ayana, the velvet curtains and the storm outside dissolved. The nursery vanished. Time shift, 5 years ago. Idlib, Syria. The air didn't smell of rain. It smelled of cordite and concrete dust. Ayana was kneeling in the dirt floor of a makeshift triage tent. The canvas walls were flapping violently in the wind of a helicopter landing nearby. The noise was deafening, a constant, grinding roar that vibrated in her teeth. On the stretcher in front of her lay a 6-year-old boy. He wasn't mute. He was choking. We have no laryngoscope, the local doctor shouted over the noise. We have no suction. The shrapnel is too deep. Hold his head, Ayana ordered. Her voice was calm, a flat line in the chaos. She didn't have a surgical suite. She didn't have a team. She had a pair of cosmetic tweezers she had sterilized with a lighter and a bottle of vodka. She pried the boy's mouth open. The dust from the airstrike coated his tongue. Deep in the pharynx, a piece of jagged metal from a car casing was wedged sideways, blocking the trachea. If you push it, the doctor warned, you sever the artery. I won't push, Ayana whispered. She blocked out the helicopter. She blocked out the screaming mother in the corner. She narrowed her world down to the millimeter of space between the metal and the flesh. She slid the tweezers in. Her hand was rock steady. She felt the cold steel against the metal shard. Clamp. Twist. Pull. She withdrew the tweezers. In her grip was a piece of twisted iron, dripping with blood. The boy gasped. A ragged, beautiful sound. The sound of life returning. Snap. The memory recoiled. Ayana was back in the Vane Estate. The rain was hammering the window. The object in Celeste's throat wasn't jagged iron. It was smooth. It glittered in the LED light. But the physics were the same. The danger was the same. It's wedged, Ayana analyzed, her mind operating at triage speed. It's calcified. The tissue has grown around it over 7 years. If I just pull, I'll tear the lining. I have to rotate it. Time shift, 7 years ago. New York City. While Ayana was extracting shrapnel in the dirt, Silas Vane was standing in the most expensive delivery room in Manhattan. It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. It became the quietest. His wife, Eleanor, was crashing. An amniotic embolism. The monitors were screaming. "Get him out," the obstetrician yelled. "No, Eleanor," Silas shouted, being dragged back by nurses. Eleanor was reaching for him. She was thrashing, gasping for air. Her hand flew to her ear, a nervous tic she always had. She yanked at her diamond earring, a massive, pear-shaped stone he had given her for their anniversary. In the violence of the seizure, the earring tore free. It flew from her hand. It disappeared into the chaotic tangle of sheets and medical equipment where the newborn baby, Celeste, was crying, mouth wide open, gasping for her first breath. Silas didn't see where it landed. He was too busy watching the light leave his wife's eyes. When the silence fell, he looked for the earring. He wanted to keep it for his daughter. But it was gone. Vanished. He assumed it had been swept up by the cleaning crew. He assumed it was lost in the laundry. He never imagined it had fallen into the open, screaming mouth of his infant daughter. He never imagined that in her first breath, she had inhaled her mother's legacy. Back to the nursery. Ayana didn't know about the diamond. She only knew about the obstruction. She looked at the hemostats in her hand. They were longer than tweezers. Stronger. Celeste's eyes were rolling back. The blue tint of her lips was darkening to gray. Ayana leaned in. She pressed her chest against the mattress to steady herself. "I'm coming for you, Celeste," she whispered. She inserted the steel instrument into the child's mouth. She bypassed the tongue. She bypassed the uvula. She went deep, into the dark tunnel where the silence lived. She felt the metal tip touch the object. Click. It was hard. Stone hard. She opened the jaws of the hemostat. She clamped down on the object. It slipped. It was coated in mucus and 7 years of scar tissue. "Stay with me." Ayana gritted her teeth. She tried again. She adjusted the angle. She felt the serrated teeth of the instrument bite into the calcified shell. "Got you." She started to pull. Suddenly, the door to the nursery burst open. The door that had burst open wasn't the hallway door. It was the balcony door, blown inward by a violent gust of wind. Rain lashed into the nursery, soaking the expensive carpet. The velvet curtains whipped around like ghosts. Ayana didn't look at the balcony. She didn't look at the storm. Her universe had shrunk to the 4 inches of space in front of her. "Celeste," Ayana said, her voice cutting through the thunder. "Listen to me." Celeste was thrashing weaker now. The oxygen starvation was setting in. Her eyes were rolling back, the whites visible in the flashlight beam. Ayana climbed onto the bed. She straddled the child's legs, using her knees to pin Celeste's arms to her sides. It was a position of dominance, but her touch was gentle. "I am going to hurt you," Ayana whispered, tears stinging her own eyes. "I have to put this deep inside. You're going to want to fight me. You're going to want to bite. But you have to stay still." She looked into the child's terror-filled eyes. "I know why you don't speak," Ayana said. "It's not your brain. It's the stone. I'm going to take the stone away." For a split second, Celeste stopped thrashing. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Someone knew. Someone finally understood that the monster wasn't in her head. It was in her throat. Celeste opened her mouth. It was a surrender. Ayana didn't hesitate. She placed the flashlight between her teeth, biting down on the rubber grip. She aimed the beam down the throat. With her left hand, she depressed the tongue. With her right, she advanced the hemostats. Steady. The steel entered the oral cavity. It passed the soft palate. Celeste gagged. Her body bucked violently, a primal rejection of the foreign object. Ayana leaned her weight forward, holding the child down. "Breathe," she commanded through the flashlight. "Try to breathe around it." She pushed deeper. Past the uvula. Past the epiglottis. She was entering the no-man's land of the airway. One slip, and she would puncture the soft tissue. One tremor, and she would push the object further down, sealing the airway completely. The tip of the hemostat touched the mass. Scritch. The sensation vibrated up the metal handle. It wasn't the soft, spongy resistance of a tumor. It was the hard, grating friction of calcification against steel. It felt like a rock. Ayana's heart hammered against her ribs. It's loose, she realized. It's not a growth. It's an object. She opened the jaws of the hemostat. She needed to get a grip. If she grabbed the top, it might slip. She had to get under it. She maneuvered the tip. She pushed against the inflamed tissue of the throat wall. Celeste's eyes watered, tears spilling sideways into her ears. Sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Ayana wedged the metal jaw under the object. She felt the curve. Clamp. She squeezed the handle. The ratchet of the hemostat clicked. Click, click. Locked. She had it. But having it wasn't enough. It had been there for 7 years. The tissue had grown around it, embracing the foreign invader. It was anchored. I have to pull, Ayana gritted out, spitting the flashlight onto the pillow so she could breathe. Celeste, I have to pull hard. She gripped the handle with both hands. She applied tension. The object didn't move. Ayana pulled harder. She felt the tissue stretch. She felt the resistance of 7 years of silence holding on. Come on, she growled internally. She gave a sharp, twisting tug, a motion designed to break the suction. Rip. A sickening, wet tearing sound echoed in the small room. The object dislodged. Blood, dark and mixed with mucus, welled up instantly. Ayana pulled the instrument out. She threw it aside. Cough. Ayana shouted, rolling Celeste onto her side. Spit it out. Celeste heaved. She gagged. A clot of blood and saliva hit the pillowcase. And then the sound changed. It wasn't the high-pitched wheeze of a blocked pipe. It was a gasp. A huge, ragged, beautiful intake of air that rushed into the lungs without obstruction. Hoo! The air hit the vocal cords for the first time in 7 years without a dampener. Ayana slumped back, shaking. She looked at the hemostat lying on the bedspread. Clamped in its jaws was a small, unrecognizable lump covered in gray calcification and blood. It looked like a pebble. But as Ayana watched, the storm outside flashed. A bolt of lightning illuminated the room. And for a second, something inside the gray lump sparkled. The lightning flash faded, plunging the room back into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the flashlight beam lying on the pillow. Ayana was shaking, her hand still hovering over the hemostat. She needed to check the airway. She needed to make sure the bleeding was minor. It's out, she whispered, half laughing, half sobbing. Celeste, it's out. Bang. The hallway door didn't just open, it was kicked in. The heavy wood slammed against the wall, splintering the frame. Silas Vane stood in the doorway. He was drenched from the storm, his tuxedo soaked, his hair plastered to his skull. He held a heavy flashlight in one hand, the beam cutting through the gloom like a searchlight. Behind him were 2 private security guards, weapons drawn. Silas swept the beam across the room. He saw the overturned furniture. He saw the blood on the pillow. And then he saw Ayana. She was straddling his daughter on the bed. She was holding a long, sharp metal instrument that was dripping with blood. Celeste was curled up, coughing and gagging, red smears on her face. Silas's brain didn't process medical emergency. It processed assassination. He saw a stranger murdering his child. A primal, animal roar tore from his throat. Get off her! Silas didn't wait for the guards. He dropped his flashlight and launched himself across the room. He moved with the terrifying speed of a father who believes he is too late. Ayana turned, her eyes widening. Mr. Vane, wait. She didn't get to finish. Silas collided with her. His shoulder hit her chest, lifting her off the bed and slamming her backward. They hit the floor hard. Ayana's head cracked against the baseboard. Stars exploded in her vision. The hemostat flew from her hand, skittering under the dresser. Silas was on top of her instantly. His hands were around her throat, squeezing. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, murderous hatred. You animal! Silas screamed, spit flying from his lips. You touched her. I'll kill you. I helped. Ayana choked, clawing at his wrists. Her vision was tunneling. Security! Silas yelled without loosening his grip. Secure the child. Call the police. She tried to cut her throat. The guards rushed in. One pulled Silas off Ayana, not to save her, but to stop him from committing murder. Sir, let us handle it. They flipped Ayana onto her stomach. A knee dug into her spine, driving the air from her lungs. Her arm was wrenched behind her back, the joint popping painfully. Stay down, the guard barked, pressing her face into the carpet. Ayana tasted dust and blood. She couldn't breathe. But she didn't care about herself. She cared about the evidence. If they didn't see the object, if they threw it away, Celeste would go back to doctors who would treat the bleeding as a trauma injury and miss the miracle. "Look!" Ayana screamed into the carpet. "Look at the floor!" "Shut her up!" Silas roared. He was by the bed now, gathering Celeste into his arms. "Oh God, Celeste. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you." He rocked the child, checking her neck for slash marks. He saw the blood on her mouth. "She's bleeding," Silas whispered, his voice breaking. "You monster." He turned back to Ayana, his eyes cold and dead. "You are going to die in prison," Silas said. "I will spend every penny I have to make sure you never see the sun again." "It wasn't me," Ayana yelled, fighting the guard's grip. She managed to lift her head. "It was the stone. Look at the hemostat. Look at what I pulled out." "Get her out of here," Silas commanded. The guards hauled Ayana to her feet. She stumbled, dizzy from the blow to her head. They dragged her toward the door. "No," Ayana pleaded, looking back at the bed. "The object. Don't let them throw it away. It's the answer. Silas, please look." Silas ignored her. He was wiping the blood from his daughter's face with his silk pocket square, weeping. Ayana was dragged into the hallway. The rain hammered against the roof, drowning out her pleas. It was over. She had saved the child, and her reward was going to be a cell. But back in the nursery, something moved. Celeste pushed herself away from her father's chest. She sat up. She was trembling, her throat raw and burning. But the air was sweet. It rushed into her lungs, cold and deep. She looked at her father. She saw the terror in his eyes. She looked at the floor where Ayana had dropped the metal tool. Next to it, glinting in the beam of the fallen flashlight, was a small, gray lump. Celeste pointed a shaking finger at it. She opened her mouth. Her vocal cords, unused for 7 years, felt stiff and strange. But they were free. She took a breath. A real breath. And she made a sound. The guards had dragged Ayana to the threshold of the nursery. One had his hand on the back of her neck, ready to shove her into the hall. Silas was turning away, his back to the room, ready to follow them and ensure the intruder was locked away. Then it happened. Cough. It wasn't a silent, heaving spasm. It was a loud, wet bark of a sound that required air, a sound that required vocal cords. Silas froze. His foot hovered mid-step. The room went dead silent, save for the rain. "Who? Wah!" A sob ripped through the nursery. It was jagged, rusty, and raw. The sound of a voice that hadn't been used in 7 years breaking free from prison. "Daddy." The word was a croak. It sounded like grinding stones. But it was unmistakable. Silas spun around. His face went slack, the rage draining out of him so fast it left him dizzy. He looked at the bed. Celeste was sitting up. She was clutching her throat with one hand, but she wasn't clawing in pain. She was holding it like something precious. Her chest was heaving with deep, greedy gulps of oxygen. "Daddy," she cried again, louder this time. "It hurts." Silas stared at her. His knees hit the floor. He didn't mean to kneel. His legs just gave out. "You," Silas whispered. "You spoke." "Look," Ayana screamed from the doorway, fighting against the guard's grip. "Look at the floor, you fool. Look at what I took out of her." The guard hesitated, looking from the sobbing child to the screaming maid. Silas tore his eyes away from his daughter. He looked at the spot on the carpet where Ayana had been pinned. Lying in the beam of the fallen flashlight was the hemostat, and next to it, a small, ugly gray lump. It looked like a kidney stone, coated in dried mucus and blood. "It's a stone," Silas murmured, confused. "She swallowed a stone?" "It's not a stone," Ayana shouted, desperate. "Break it. Step on it." Silas looked at the object. He looked at Ayana. He saw the desperation in her eyes. Not the desperation of a criminal, but the desperation of a healer who isn't being heard. He stood up shakily. He walked over to the lump. He raised his heavy dress shoe. "Don't be crazy," his mind whispered. "It's just a rock." But he brought his heel down. Hard. Crunch. The calcified shell, brittle from years of slow accumulation, shattered instantly under his weight. Silas lifted his foot. He looked down. He expected dust. He expected a pebble. Instead, a beam of pure, refracted light hit him in the eye. Lying in the center of the crushed gray powder was a diamond. It was a pear-shaped solitaire, 3 carats flawless. Even covered in grime, it caught the flashlight beam and exploded with fire. Silas stopped breathing. The world tilted on its axis. He knew that diamond. He had bought it in Antwerp 8 years ago. He had put it on his wife's ear the morning she went into labor. He had searched for it in the delivery room while the doctors called the time of death. Flashback. The chaos. The screaming. Eleanor thrashing. The earring flying from her ear and vanishing. He looked at Celeste. He looked at the diamond. The truth hit him with the force of a train. It wasn't a brain defect. It wasn't a neurological disconnect. It wasn't a mystery that required Swiss doctors and million-dollar machines. It was his wife's earring. It had fallen into his daughter's throat at birth. It had lodged there, growing silent and heavy, blocking her voice, choking her dreams. And for 7 years, he had paid experts to stare at charts while a maid, a woman he paid minimum wage, had solved it with a flashlight and a pair of tweezers. Silas let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a keen of pure, devastating grief. He picked up the diamond. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it again. It was wet with his daughter's blood. "Release her," Silas croaked. The guards didn't move fast enough. "Release her," Silas roared, turning on them with the fury of a man who realized he had almost murdered his savior. The guards let Ayana go. She slumped against the doorframe, rubbing her bruised throat. Silas looked at her. He held out the diamond in his trembling palm. "You found it," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "You found her voice." Ayana didn't look at the diamond. She looked past him, to the little girl on the bed who was breathing, crying, and living. "I just looked," Ayana said softly. "I just looked at her." Silas knelt on the wet carpet, the diamond burning a hole in his palm. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the girl he had treated like a broken doll for 7 years. Celeste took a breath. It was a shaky, rattling inhale, pulling oxygen past the raw tissue where the diamond had been lodged. She looked at the man weeping on the floor. She remembered him from the edges of her pain. He was the one who smelled like cold air and expensive cologne. He was the one who never stayed. But he was staying now. Celeste's lips parted. Her tongue, clumsy from disuse, tapped the roof of her mouth. "Duh!" The sound was faint, like dry leaves scraping together. Silas stopped breathing. He crawled closer, dragging his tuxedo pants through the mud and blood. "Celeste," he whispered. "Duh." She swallowed. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. It was the hurt of a muscle waking up. She pushed the air from her diaphragm, just like Ayana had shown her when she fought for breath. "Daddy." The word was a croak. It was ugly, guttural, and cracked in the middle. To Silas Vane, it was a choir of angels. It broke him. The billionaire who had fired people for looking at him wrong, the man who had bought silence, collapsed. He buried his face in the mattress next to her leg and sobbed. He cried with a violence that shook his shoulders, letting go of 7 years of grief, 7 years of guilt, and 7 years of missing his wife. Celeste reached out. Her small hand, shaking, touched his hair. Ayana watched from the doorway. Her throat was bruising purple where Silas had strangled her. Her head throbbed, but as she watched the father and daughter, she didn't feel pain. She felt the quiet, warm hum of a job done right. She turned to leave. She was a maid. Her work was finished. "Wait!" Silas didn't look up, but his hand shot out, grabbing the hem of Ayana's apron. He lifted his head. His face was a ruin of tears and snot. He looked at Ayana with an expression of profound, shattering humility. "Don't go," Silas whispered. "Please. Help us." 3 months later, the headline of the New York Times read, "Vane Estate sues Swiss medical group for $100 million in gross negligence case." Dr. Aris had lost his license. The MRI scans, when reviewed by an independent board, showed the anomaly clearly. They had ignored it because treating a rare neurological condition paid better than removing a foreign object. But that was the business page. The real story was in the West Wing. It wasn't called the Silent Wing anymore. It was the Music Wing. Ayana Cole stood in the doorway of the nursery. She wasn't wearing a gray uniform. She was wearing a cream silk blouse and tailored trousers. She wasn't holding a bucket. She was holding a clipboard. "Director Cole," a young assistant said, running up to her. "The architects are here for the foundation annex. They want to know where to put the pediatric trauma center." "Tell them to put it near the garden," Ayana smiled. "The kids need sunlight, not just medicine." Silas Vane had not just exonerated her. He had empowered her. He had established the Eleanor Vane Pediatric Foundation, dedicated to diagnosing misidentified children in underserved communities. And he had named Ayana the executive director, with a salary that meant her mother would never worry about rent again. Ayana walked into the nursery. The soundproof padding had been ripped off the walls. The windows were open, letting in the sounds of birds and the gardener's lawnmower. In the center of the room, Silas Vane sat on the floor. He was wearing jeans. Celeste was sitting on his lap. She was holding a book, The Cat in the Hat. "Read it again," Celeste demanded. Her voice was raspy. The scar tissue on her vocal cords would never fully heal, but it was loud. It was demanding. It was the voice of a 7-year-old girl who had a lot of catching up to do. "Again," Silas laughed. "That's the third time, Celeste." "Again, Daddy." Silas looked up and saw Ayana. He smiled. It wasn't the cold, shark-like smile of the billionaire. It was the tired, happy smile of a dad. "You heard the boss," Silas said to Ayana. He turned the page. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, in a small crystal case, sat the diamond earring. It wasn't worn. It wasn't sold. It sat there as a reminder that the most valuable things aren't diamonds or silence. The most valuable thing was the sound of a little girl reading a rhyme, loud enough for the whole world to hear. Do you think the doctors deserve to go to jail for hiding the truth? Or was it just a mistake? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the truth coming to light.